Okay, it's now 11 o'clock, so we might as well make a start. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Succeed at Leicester session on creating effective presentations. My name is Tracy Dix, and I'm based at the Centre for Academic Achievement, which is in the David Wilson Library. Like I said, we've got Emma here today joining us as a student ambassador. Emma, would you like to introduce yourself and maybe say what subject you're studying, what year you're in?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Emma. I'm a fifth and final year medical student. So I've been here a long time and lots of presentations. I look forward to meeting you all.
Oh, great. Yes, you have. You've been at uni a long time. Well done for sticking the journey. Right, okay, so I'm going to move on to what today's session is going to cover. As I said, there is a lot packed in, so I might go quite quickly. So today we'll be talking about the kind of steps to take when you're getting started on your presentation, what you need to be aware of, and how to prepare for it. How you go about selecting and refining a research topic, or if you've been set a topic, how you might go about exploring that. So we'll be exploring this in two different dimensions. How you then go about developing a research question based on the topic that you've been looking at. I've also thrown in a section on effective group working just because it's quite common for presentation assignments to be set as group work as well. So I thought this would be quite helpful, and I don't think there's another Succeed at Leicester session on group working either. And then the more kind of technical aspects of how to go about structuring your content, designing the materials, and then finally delivering your presentation. So as I said, loads to get through, but hopefully we'll get through them okay. So it's useful to think about what you want to achieve when you're getting started on any assignment. And at university, when you are set a task or an assessed assignment, it will always be accompanied by an assessment brief that tells you what the expectations are. And usually it goes into very technical information like how do you format your work? So for example, with an essay, you would normally use Microsoft Word with font size 12, double line spacing, and so on. With presentations, the expectation is normally that PowerPoint is used, but there may be scope to explore different tools as well. So do be clear on what the expectations are, and you may want to have a chat with your module tutor if there's something else that's not touched on in the assessment brief. The next thing is so I said understand the expectations of the presentation. I'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a moment. And then, make sure you have a suitable topic, or make sure you've kind of prepared really well and analyzed the one that's been set for you. Okay, so a couple of things you need to know before starting work. How long should your presentation be? What the presentation needs to cover. Is there a choice of topic, one that's been set for you, or do you need to select a suitable topic? And either way, you would need to thoroughly analyze those. So I've mentioned that before already. Okay, so with presentation tasks, you may have heard of the saying, how long is a piece of string? Presentations can vary quite a lot. So traditionally, they would follow the format for academic conference presentations, since we're at university after all. So this could range from, say, a 10 to 20-minute presentation, followed by 5 minutes at the end for some questions, comments, or discussion. Emma, how long have your presentations been that you've worked on?
So I think mine have usually ranged from anywhere from about 10 minutes to half an hour.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely a different style you have to approach presentations depending on what length of time you're doing. It's quite hard to feel that you can fill half an hour, but then also sometimes you have to speak very fast in order to get 10 minutes in. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So yeah, you definitely have to plan your material for the length of presentation. Thank you for that input. Yeah, so So as we've seen, the length can vary, so do check with your module tutor if you're unclear, but I'm pretty certain the assessment brief would almost always tell you. Yes, and Sam has just said if anyone has any questions throughout the presentation, do please pop them in the chat. Um, okay, and what format should your presentation follow? So again, this could vary in that it could be an in-person delivery that's required, or we're seeing more video recordings, I think, to be honest, as a bit of an aftermath from COVID. And it's usually expected that you would use some kind of visual aid during your presentation. As I mentioned before, often PowerPoint, but I'll get Emma to feedback on this as well. But there are also other tools that you can make use of to make the process of designing your slides a lot easier, such as Canva. So I'll do a little demo of that later. You may also use something like a visualizer. So for example, if you're in the archaeology department and you're asked to show and tell your audience some artifacts and what they mean, you might want to use a visualizer for that instead. Um, Schools are making assessments more relevant to your future careers. So there's something that we call authentic assessment, and you don't need to remember this term at all. But the idea is that you basically deliver presentations in formats that are similar to what you might come across in your future career. And the thinking behind this is that it's meant to build your experience and confidence through your degree years to the kinds of things you're likely to do in work later on in life. So a few examples of these sort of assessments may include something like, develop a Dragon's Den style business idea and make a pitch to, a potential funder for your idea. You may be asked to do something in the style of a TED Talk, for example, or again, if you're studying archaeology or perhaps geology or something like that, you may be asked to design a talk that's aimed to a school group or visiting tour group to the site that you may be working at. And finally, on a more general level, you may be asked to present to a brief, but that brief will be something that is designed specifically for your discipline. So Emma, have you had any authentic assessments?
So actually not through medicine. The only real presentations we've had has been maybe within a group work, and we've had a week to make a presentation. But it's never necessarily gone towards our grades. But also through being an ambassador, actually, I've had to deliver quite a few presentations and make them and things. And whilst I'm not being assessed, it's very important that I get those right.
Hmm. Yes, and I mean, what you're doing now is a form of presentation, isn't it? It's kind
Yeah,
of
absolutely.
improvised. So it's about gaining that confidence to just kind of speak to an audience. Thank you again for that. Okay, I will move on. So, what do you need to achieve to do well? I think I've mentioned this a lot already, so make sure you review the assessment brief. In terms of finding out what such a presentation would involve, this refers specifically to, okay, so for example, you've been asked to do a TED Talk. What you might want to do is go and research, what are TED Talks like? What are the features of them? In a similar way to, what are the kind of characteristics of a business pitch? And so how would I design such a presentation? So I would say that, something like Google or a general search engine is fine as a starting point where you're kind of scoping these things out. But you may wish to reference some sources as well. So perhaps you might find a book on, how to do a good TED Talk or something like that. So do evaluate accordingly if you want to include sources in your reference list. Finally, do plan your schedule in advance and make sure you factor in plenty of time for things like run-throughs and editing. Just because, when you got text on slides, they seem to kind of make sense in your head. And then when you say it out loud, you might find that certain things are a little bit clunky or they don't quite work, or you might be repeating yourself. So do just be mindful of that because you don't want too much repetition, especially if it's a 10-minute presentation, because the timing is quite tight. So, in terms of selecting a topic, then, where do you begin? So, it can be quite daunting trying to think of a research topic. And here are some questions that can help to spark some inspiration. A good starting point is thinking about what you are passionate or curious about. Because, as Emma said, you may have to work on this for a week, perhaps even longer. So it's good to sustain that interest as much as possible to keep your motivation going. Think about why it's interesting to you. Because if you can engage with things on this level, then it's more likely that you're able to make the topic interesting to your audience as well. What kind of elements may be involved? And I'll show you an example in a moment. Is this topic widely discussed? Is this a controversial topic? Is it current? Are people generally interested in it? Because if they are, then again, you're more likely to have an engaged audience when you do present it. What do you think is the most interesting part and why? And this can be a question that is relevant to when you come to kind of narrowing it down for, a 10 or 20-minute presentation later on. So these are the questions that will help you to decide on a topic. And you may find that you'd have to navigate these interests as a group as well. So you may want to agree on a broad topic that everyone can engage with, and then find that you might have to compromise later on and just, give individuals areas that, that kind of resonate quite well with them, that they would want to investigate on an individual level. Okay, so here's a topic that I've come up with just as an example. And hopefully you'll find it quite current as well, because if you're just starting out at university, then thinking about your work-life balance and your mental health will be something that's hopefully useful to you. So I began with the question of how would you look after your mental health while studying at university? And from there, I thought mapped a variety of ideas that I feel are related to it. So, for example, I might go with time management to begin with. So I talked about the work-life balance. And how would you manage your time between, all the modules that you're studying during the semester, the deadlines for assessments, but at the same time, how would you also balance that with all the opportunities that are available to you at university? So, for example, joining clubs and societies, developing a social life, but also, things like volunteering, getting to grips with like placements, if you've got placement years. So there are lots of things to think about. How would you go about prioritizing tasks, but also managing other people's expectations? So on several levels, there's a sense of in terms of how you go about managing your own expectations. So with time that you have, so for example, with the time that you might have to work on this presentation and perhaps other competing deadlines, how would you set objectives to help you achieve your goals and achieve a grade that you're happy with? So it's not necessarily about, cramming as much study into the time that you have as possible, but it's about kind of balancing everything to kind of to give yourself headspace, and to feel fulfilled, rather than overloaded. In terms of managing others' expectations, we may find that, many of you could be at university for different reasons. You may have, for example, parental expectations and pressures. And so it's useful to think about how you might go about managing those expectations, so that you get everything you want out of your university experience. And so I think it's a good time to think about your personal values. So how can you make your university experience align with those values? So in terms of the opportunities that you say yes to when you're here, it could be, contributing to your community, taking on some part-time work to help balance your finances a little bit. You might want to do some volunteering, mentoring, to increase your confidence and your experience while you're here. You may want to do some sports coaching if you're into sports, for example. And the idea is all of these things help to kind of enrich your educational experience when you're here at university. but also in terms of, the modules that you're taking on your course, how do you engage with them in ways that help to inspire and motivate you? So it doesn't just feel like you're jumping through hoops and, working on your assignments to submit them. University ideally should be a lot more than that. And then I can't actually see the last thing, but I think it says extra. Sam, could you help me out? Under engaging education, I've got like a feature that is in my way, so I can't see it.
Under engaging education, sorry, whereabouts
It's
is?
at the bottom. Can you see my
Oh,
cursor?
engaging education and extracurricular activities. Is that what
Yep, that's the
the one
one.
below?
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah, thank you. I've got the navigate forward thingy in front of it, so I can't see. Yeah, so I've mentioned that before, like how do you balance, your curriculum with the extracurricular activities? Because there's so many opportunities to take part in lots of different sports and, societies when you're here at university. And of course, all that kind of feeds into your social life. It gives you a sense of community while you're at uni, and sports may be a part of it as well. I did touch on part-time work. So, okay, the pink branch now, I should be a little bit more specific when I'm presenting. Um, Alongside work and life, we need to kind of balance finances as well because being at university comes with costs. And, having financial security would give you peace of mind in terms of your mental health while you're here at university. It's helpful not to have to worry about money too much while you're here. So it's useful to think about, okay, what finance options are out there, your student loan, make sure everything's kind of in hand. And like I said, whether you might take on a part-time job while you're at university. And alongside that, we need to find time to relax as well. And get proper rest. So, and on a more technical level, aside from your social life and activities that you do for fun, it might be worth thinking about how would you incorporate sleep well into your daily routines, thinking about your sleep cycles. Some people have like smart watches to track their REM cycles and stuff like that. You may or may not want to do this. And I'm aware that this might conflict with my next point, which is about electronic devices. How would you go about reducing stimulation, particularly before bedtime? I think the advice is now to stay off your devices for an hour before bed if you want to sleep well. And then finally, ideas like access to outdoor spaces. The idea of, the more continual movement you can do, the kind of healthier and the more well you might feel, access to fresh air, exercise, and nature. So things like that. So this was just, a thought map of everything I came up with around well-being, mental health at university. And then I started to group the ideas thematically and kind of think of overarching themes and what they meant to me. So it could have been things like personal accountability. So we're talking about mindset, your daily habits. It could have been diet, which I didn't particularly touch on earlier, actually. What constitutes a good diet, how it could feed into things like your social life and community. Things like personal identity, how meaningful and challenging work could feed into your sense of self, and then the kind of restful side of things. I mean, as you're, working through an activity like this, you may find that the themes that come up are different for you because we all approach things differently, and that's absolutely fine. This is just my own example. And from here, I then might want to think, okay, so what do I want to focus on? Because even in a 20-minute presentation, which is the longer side of the scale, or 30 minutes, it would be really difficult to go into all of that in a lot of detail and quite overwhelming for your audience as well. So I decided to kind of go for the more sporty and physical side of things. So in terms of social life, sports, extracurricular activities, but also, financial security to think about how you can afford to engage in the sport of your choice. But also when you come to university, you might want to orientate yourself on the available facilities so you know you can participate, when you can do so, and work that around your timetable. And from here, you develop a research question. So my starting point in terms of a research question based on all the information I've come up with is exploring the importance of sports participation for improving mental well-being in university students. And then I might consider that during my presentation, I would want to narrow it down even more. So you could think about, what year group do I want to focus on, for example. So if it's sports participation, I might think, okay, it could be a particular concern for placement year students, for example, if they're no longer on campus, how might they engage? It might be a consideration for distance learning students who don't perhaps, don't have the same facilities on campus that campus-based students might have. Or perhaps for finalists, if you're in your final year and the kind of grade weighting counts for a lot towards your final mark, how would you balance the things you want to do in your leisure time with your curriculum? What kind of sports would you want to focus on? It could be ball sports, track and field, esports, dance, performance-based stuff. And these factors also influence how, students would participate in them. Would they engage in coaching, be involved in coaching, just go for training, just play the sport for fun from time to time? Would they be involved in tournaments? Would they have rehearsals and performances to be involved in as well? And how would that feed into the overall idea of improving mental well-being? And which demographics? So I touched on this a little bit already in terms of, whether it's a placement year student or distance learning. We could also think about, is it postgrads, students, international students, first, second year, and so on. So there's a bit of a crossover between demographics and year group. You might also, for example, want to look at social media campaigns and initiatives such as This Girl Can to see, what that throws up in terms of your research. And so now I'd like to just touch a little bit on the kind of academic expectations with assignments. I won't go into too much detail. And yeah, there'll be more expansion on this in the essay writing session that is on next week. So I think the first thing I would say in terms of delivering a presentation is don't go off, have a topic that's in front of you and then go off and find lots of ideas that are related to a topic that you can present, pop them on your slide, and then you're ready to go. At university level, the expectations are a little bit higher than that. And of course, it does depend on your assessment brief as well. So many of you will be aware that, as you come through the schooling system, your education will be very much geared more towards things like recognizing and recalling facts. So memorizing your times tables, learning the ABCs and things like that. As you progress, you start to understand more what, these facts mean, and then you begin to apply it. At university, we're more on a trajectory of the kind of 4 levels at the top. So application, analysis, evaluation, and then finally the creation of different parts to make a new whole. So these are higher levels of engagement with knowledge. And, the other levels that you would have engaged with at school and college level are very much important as well, because they're very much about the foundations of learning. But at university level, it's about looking at the ideas, looking at the materials that you come across, and kind of presenting your own take on it, which is why early on I emphasized, why the topic is important to you. What is the kind of angle, the unique angle that you're going to be bringing to it? So it's useful to think about those things, but also kind of combining your research and imposing your own criticality upon it. Emma, would you like to say anything about this topic?
I think just moving on from what you said, kind of, it is interesting how things kind of transition between secondary school and university, and not to find it overwhelming, because it is something that they ease you into quite well, and suddenly you'll find that, oh my goodness, I'm doing these higher level areas of expanding my knowledge. And yeah, I look back now and think, oh, of course, yeah, that's happened. But it's interesting how they do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you get terms like criticality and evaluation thrown at you, it can seem really, really intimidating. But what I would say is, as you progress through university, before you know it, you will be creating new knowledge because you're kind of guided through that process. So I hope this isn't too daunting right now. It's not intended to be. Okay, so that was like a bit of a digression. But moving on to presentations. So then, having explored your topic and come up with your ideas, try to bring your presentation to life. So start finding some case studies or examples to illustrate what you mean. Consider what kind of research is available on this area. And if you're having trouble finding relevant research, you can book an appointment with your academic librarian who will help you out with that. And do use things like visuals and templates to kind of just make things a little bit more interesting as well. Okay, so in terms of finding suitable images, I won't go into each of these in tons of detail, but I've just grouped them. So here are lots of different websites that you can use. With images, there is a kind of exception within intellectual property laws that say that if you're using them for any educational purposes, it's fine to use anything you find on the internet. However, I would say that it's good practice to start now by looking for images that you can use legally on a commercial basis as well. Just because then you don't kind of find yourself unstuck later on when you need to do these things and you don't know how. So I'll do a demo first. So I'm just going to stop sharing. I'll need to do a bit of navigating. And hopefully it works well. Right. It's always a bit clunky. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Can you see Canva?
Yes, it's visible.
Thank you. Yeah, so with Canva, there are loads of, different templates that are available, and you can create your PowerPoint slides in Canva and then export them into PowerPoint later on. So search for whatever you need to. There's a search bar at the top. So as you can see, I've looked for university presentations before, so let's just roll with that one. And it comes up with lots of different templates. So these are kind of more general university style templates. Let's go with that one. A very inoffensive template of, a laptop on a desk. Try it free for 30 days. No, I won't do that right now. Let's close that and okay, maybe I will try it free and hope. Sorry, during my run through, it didn't do this. Use. Oh, you know what? I think, okay.
It's because it's a pro template.
Yeah,
so
I just realized that.
There are
Yep.
free ones as well, yeah.
Yeah, so the ones with the crown that say pro, you need to pay for or have a subscription to. However, there are lots of free ones. So that's what happens if you go into a pro presentation or an image or anything like that. Okay, so I can customize this one instead. And you will see that, it goes into an abstract, the kinds of things that you would need for a thesis defense. For many of you, this will probably come a little bit later on in your journey. So you get to see what the slides look like from the very beginning, and you can adapt them. And it's really, really flexible. So you fill in your text here. It likes to give you lots of tips as well. You can change the colors of different elements. So for example, if I go into this box and you tap on the color, you can change the color of it really easily. You can substitute shapes. So if you look at the elements on your left, you can, for example, put an image in a moving image, an animation, whatever you like. So it's really simple to use. And all I can say is I wish I had something like this when I was a student. The other thing I want to share as well is Unsplash. So Unsplash is a website where, again, you can find lots of visuals. There are lots available in Canva as well. Again, you know, they're free versions and paid ones. So for example, if I'm in Unsplash and I want to look up an artifact, so the ones at the top are sponsored and you'd have to pay for them. But if you scroll down, there will usually be some choice. Or, you know, if you have an artifact that you actually want to show, you can take your own picture. And then in terms of copyright, you'll be covered there. So from here, you'll be able to download the photo. And it even gives you a link that you can copy and paste in your slides. And that helps you with the attribution, so you don't have to worry about it too much. And finally, there's another site called FreePic, which Emma's quite fond of, for vector images. So with vector images, it's about, so if you need images that you can scale up, for example, to print on a banner, then vectors are really useful because you don't compromise the integrity of your image, which means that you don't end up with like blurry images on banners or anything like that. Again, you can search. So I'll go with artifact since I started with that. See what's available. There are loads of different options and they're, I think, quite easy to download. But Emma, do fill me in on that one because I haven't used FreePic in quite a long time.
Yeah, so I've used it before, like for a poster, like you said.
Yeah.
And what they do, which is quite good, is sometimes have little cartoon people
Yeah.
doing different things, and you can change like the color of the clothes they wear and who's in the picture, and you can kind of tailor it to whatever poster or slide, whatever's on the poster or slide, and it can make for quite a fun visual. So that's mainly what I've used FreePic for. Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, all really good tools. Fabulous. And, you know, and then in PowerPoint, there is a designer tool now that resizes things for you, so you don't have to like resize your image a lot. I used to spend ages doing that before the new features came in. Okay, I better keep moving. So, in terms of presenting with visual cues, how would you go about using images and media well? So do choose good quality media. And generally the ones that you would find on those websites are pretty decent. If you were to go onto Google and search images, you might find that some of them are too small. And so when you stick them on your slides, they come up blurry. So using the ones from the list of sites that I've included will mean that you have less issue with these sorts of things. Do try to make sure it illustrates what you're saying and it's not just some kind of random image that has nothing to do with the message, because your audience will end up being kind of confused. Do remember to follow up on why it relates to the point you're making if you think that's needed. I mean, so for example, with the image I've included here, I don't feel like I really need to follow up on it too much because it is about, you know, it shows someone presenting with images. So I think it's quite self-explanatory. Do make sure that your text is still legible on if you're superimposing it on the media, or you know, if you created it somewhere else and you put it in. I mean, again, if you use Canva, you'll probably be fine. So no worries there. And if you wish, do fill the screen for more impact as well. And it can mean that you don't end up kind of just reading all the text off your screen all the time, because it's filled with an image that adds interest to your presentation. All right, so now I'm going to move along to think a little bit about group work. And I'm sure many of you are very worldly wise people, and you'll know that WPTF means why the flop. So I just want to think a little bit about, you know, the times when group work perhaps hasn't gone to plan, or you know, things went wrong between individuals. Yeah, and just think about, you know, what is it that causes group work to not go particularly well? Why do things go wrong? You can think about the work allocations. You can think about the dynamics between individuals, for example. If you have any ideas on that, do stick them in the chat. Emma, you've had lots of experience with group work now. How has it gone for you?
Yeah, I've had a fair share of very good ones and more difficult ones. I think times when they've not worked, I guess I find it's often when someone's been maybe allocated a role that they're not most suited for, or maybe there's an imbalance in how much work everybody's doing within the group. And I think the times I've found it's gone particularly well is when people get given either areas of topic they are actually passionate about, or maybe a particular role within the presentation that they're the most passionate about. So yeah, I think finding that balance of people's strengths is probably the most important thing I've found with group work anyway.
Yep. Yep, brilliant. Thank you. I just realized I was 44 minutes into this presentation, but I think I've got a little bit more time than that. Thank you, Emma, for that. Yeah, I would very much agree with what you said. And now I'm going to discuss an approach that may help you to kind of allocate work in an effective way. So this is something that's from a book called The Big Leap, which comes from like the world of business leadership. And the author, Gay Hendricks, talks about how us as individuals, we all have 4 different zones. It starts off with the zone of incompetence. So there are things that, other people can do way better than you can. And perhaps it doesn't interest you or anything like that, and you're not very good at it. For me, I would say that's technical things. So if I need to tinker around with technology, quite often it doesn't happen. And I really appreciate it when my colleagues like Sam can just pipe up and go, yeah, Tracy, just do it like this. And they give me the steps, and that's really brilliant. The next is the zone of incompetence. So these are things that you may be perfectly competent in, but you'll find that other people can do these things just as well as you can, or perhaps even better than you can, and they love these activities way more. So for me, I would say this is admin. So I can be quite organized with admin, and I do it reasonably well, but it's not something I particularly love. And I have worked with colleagues in the past who, love doing admin, and they'll say, Tracy, yeah, you can pass it on to me and I'll help you out with that. Let me know when you need help with it. And they're really enthusiastic. And that is teamwork at its finest. The next is your zone of excellence. So you do these things extremely well. And in the future, you can make a decent living from it. So you're probably not kind of thinking about your future career quite as yet. But the kind of downside of your zone of excellence is that this is possibly where other people want you to stay. So you may find in your future career, you get promoted up to a certain level, and then because you're so good at it, you kind of end up staying there, and you don't really find the opportunity to push yourself much further, because if you're making a good living from it and that's taking up all your time, how do you, pursue a different interest? And then finally, there's what Hendricks talks about as your zone of genius. So this is the set of activities that you are uniquely suited to do, and it's a special gift of yours. And I do realize that if you're working on a presentation with a week to go, it might be difficult to really tap into these things, but it's worth just thinking about people's strengths and weaknesses as far as you can. And while reflecting on your zone of genius, some things may come up, because what Gay Hendricks says is, these are things you cannot help doing. They're just part of your natural gifts. So you may find that as a child, you were told off for doing it, for example. So if you're a very eloquent speaker, you may find as a child you were told to hush really often, or to talk less, or to not disrupt your class and things like that. And so it may bring up some feelings in you to kind of revisit these gifts, and to kind of recognize that that's actually what it is. And so why is the zone of genius idea useful in group work? So for me, I think thinking about it helps you to understand what to prioritize in your daily life. And yeah, I get that at university level, there's a sense that you have to do lots of different things. You can't just not work on parts of your essay or not edit it because it's not within your zone of genius, because it has to be your own work. But insofar as it is possible, you can try to adapt things. So you focus on the activities that light you up, and less on things that don't. And group work is a really good opportunity to explore that. So it helps you gain useful experience for your future career, your progression at university, while having fun as well. So hopefully that makes it sound like a win-win to you. And yeah, so this is just an image that comes up a lot in kind of educational sectors. And it's just the idea that, getting everyone to do the same activities doesn't necessarily make it fair. And it's worth considering that. So Emma, you made a really good point earlier on. And so I would say, in order to facilitate effective group work, do try to assign tasks according to each person's zone of genius. As far as is possible, it isn't always. Do reflect on what a fair contribution could be for each person. So just to give you an example, very often at university, say you're in your first year, many students are quite shy and conscious of public speaking. Whereas you might get, the odd student who has done performance arts. And so they're really confident. They're used to facing an audience and, just performing to them. And so doing say 1 5-minute presentation, for example, will be really easy for that person. They might have one run through and they're ready to go. Whereas the other person, the other one who's really introverted and struggles with public speaking, may find it really, really difficult. It may really sap their energy. And so it's just useful to come at this from a place of empathy to kind of understand where people are coming from. If you're in a situation where everyone seems to enjoy the same tasks, so for example, Canva is really fun to tinker around with, you get really creative, then you can take this as an opportunity to be inventive with how you deliver on the assignment. Everyone can perhaps work on their own task within Canva, for example, but then there might be an additional task to go along with it as well. Another thing you can do is to agree the parameters of each person's contribution and let them go about it their own way. So if you're kind of working on an assignment and perhaps there's been compromise in terms of the topic you pick because people can't agree, you may then finally choose something that everyone is just okay with. So it's a bit of a compromise, but then within that, you can pick the subtopic and you can approach it in your own way and present it how you want to. But do make sure that you kind of keep in touch with each other to make sure that everything coheres well, because that will be part of the assessment as well. So how can group work support personal development? Hopefully it's starting to become clear by now, but through group work, you get to learn from other people's experiences and lots of different points of view. You get to understand the diversity of personality types that are out there because we are very different. And it's only from working with other people very closely that you can understand how different we can be. You gain a much greater understanding of your own strengths and weaknesses. You develop collaborative skills. You also develop empathy and negotiation skills. And it helps you develop leadership skills as well, because advocating for yourself in a group is one form of leadership. It doesn't necessarily need to be about leading the group. That's not the only way to do leadership. Okay, so now moving on to the more kind of technical side of structuring your assignment. When you present, so it should have a clear structure, which includes an introduction, the main body, and a conclusion. And this, again, is very similar to essay writing, so do come along for the next session on essay writing as well, because I go into that in a lot more detail that I can't necessarily do today. But having a clear structure will just help your audience to absorb what you're telling them. And it means that everything is just signposted a bit more clearly. Okay, so here's a kind of blueprint of what a presentation might look like. So I've gone with a 10-minute presentation to start with. But, obviously with a 20-minute presentation, you would just scale that up and double the figures and go accordingly. So you may have an introduction, you may have 3 separate sections, and then a conclusion. And what this means is, say you have a group of 5 working on your presentation, that's 2 minutes per presenter, which is not very long at all. And again, as a ballpark figure, these are the kind of average number of words that you can speak in 2 minutes. But again, do rehearse because everybody speaks at a different pace. So it's good to be clear on that. And then make sure you finish on time. So you've got your time for your 5 minutes Q&A at the end, and think about how you would handle those questions. Yeah, I mean, you don't have to follow this exactly. So as I said before, if you've got someone in your group who is really shy and the thought of standing up in front of everyone is really mortifying, then you might just want to say, you can do the signpost for this next section and present for like half a minute or something. And that might help them a lot to ease them into presenting. So with your introduction, these are the sorts of things that you will cover. I won't go into it in a lot of detail, but it'll be on the slides that you'll have access to later on. And I will go into it a lot more in the essay writing session. The kind of structure of how you might present your information. Again, I'll cover it more next week, so I won't go into it too much now. And making sure that your presentation has a conclusion as well. So do summarize it at the end and round up the key evidence discussions and why they're important in the broader subject area. With longer assignments or presentations, so if you're talking 20 or 30 minutes, you may want to acknowledge the limitations. So in terms of the gaps in research, particularly if you were looking for something on a particular topic and you found that there wasn't much out there. And then finally, the delivery of your presentation. So do practice and do some run-throughs. Record yourself, make sure you're engaging your audience, time your presentation to make sure that it doesn't overrun. I realize that these are cameras, not video cameras, but I really like the image. The expressions I thought were really good, so I've included it anyway. Do remember to smile, make eye contact, and infuse energy into your presentation because your audience will be more enthused about what you're saying if you are. If you read off the slide, so for example, if I came to this and I went, so dealing with questions, and I made no eye contact and I delivered everything in a monotone voice, your audience would fall asleep very quickly. So anyway, in terms of dealing with questions, you can feel a bit like a rabbit in the headlights when it comes to this. However, there are ways to kind of cope with it, and planning in advance is, a good approach. All of us have access to quite a huge mine of knowledge, but it can be quite difficult to extract just the right information when you're put on the spot and someone's asked you a question. And very often the questions that do come up will be slightly different from the ones you've prepared or planned. So it's really important to, kind of keep a clear head with this, take a bit of time, think of your response, and come up with something. So finally, just a bit of a quiz. What would you do if someone asks you a question that you don't understand? We're getting towards the end of the presentation now. So would you say that you don't understand what the questioner is talking about? Would you answer the question that you thought the questioner probably asked? Or C, would you clarify with the questioner what they meant by the question? So do just pop in the chat what you think the best approach could be. This is quite a quiet group today. Yep, I got C. Yes, yeah, well done. I would agree with that. Do clarify with the questioner on what they meant. This ensures that you do answer the question that's asked, and it provides you with additional time to think about your answer as well. With the others, they're kind of problematic. it's a bit risky because there's going to be a disjointedness if you answer the wrong question, and it could be quite awkward. If you say that you don't understand, it could be regarded as a little confrontational and a bit impolite, and it may discourage other people from asking questions as well. So, I mean, you can say you don't understand, but just think about how you go about phrasing that response. What would you do if someone makes a comment that you don't agree with? What would you do particularly if your marker makes a comment that you don't agree with? That could be quite a challenge. So would you ignore the comment? Would you try to justify your point of view through the use of evidence and logical arguments? Or would you tell the person that they are wrong? Yep, I've got someone saying B, B. Yep, I think you're all ready to field questions for presentations. Yep, this is by far the best way to convince your listeners. It's much harder to argue with evidence. I mean, someone can counter with counter evidence, of course. Don't ignore the comment. Again, some kind of response will be needed, especially if it's coming from your examiner. But also, it kind of makes people feel unheard, and that's not a nice place to be. Tell the person that they are wrong. If you don't present any evidence on this, will this really convince your listeners that yours is the more valid point of view? But also just kind of straight out saying that they're wrong, again, can be quite confrontational and creates a not so nice environment during your presentation. Now, I think I've got just two more. So what do you do if somebody asks you a question you don't know the answer to? Do you anticipate the kinds of questions that will come up? Don't pretend to know the answer if you don't, because you'll end up waffling. Admit ignorance. Be dismissive about your ignorance. Should you say that you're not sure, but that it's an interesting point that you will investigate? Ask your questioner what they think, unless it's the examiner, or open it to the audience. Option F, tell the questioner as much as you know and point them to sources of information. So there could be multiple options here. Which are the ones that you would go with? With option E, I think that's quite interesting, asking the questioner what they think, unless it's the examiner. Emma, have you ever been in a situation where you've kind of turned your examiner's question back on them?
I'm trying to think. I think I've found myself in a situation where I've had to sort of, yeah, like almost say their question back to them and kind of change it a little bit so I can say what I do know. So a little bit like F.
Yeah.
I've also had situations where I've had to just say I'm actually not the expert in that one, but signpost it to somebody else in the group and say they'll know the answer and they can give the answer.
Yeah. Yeah, I think those all sound like good responses. And yeah, I think a combination of F and E could be quite good. Sam, do feel free to weigh in on this if you feel like you've got something to add as well. So I think if you've like personally, if you've told a question as much as you know, you pointed them to sources of information, but also then if it's your marker who is a specialist in the area, saying to them, do you know of anything beyond what I've said so far, I think would be quite valid because it shows a willingness to learn as well. And you're not just kind of admitting ignorance and not doing anything about it. So a couple of gray areas there, but I think that would be an okay response. So, yep, so most of them are okay. Don't waffle or pretend you know an answer that you don't, and don't dismiss ignorance either. So oh no, that was the last one. Okay, so finally, I thought it might be interesting. I'm gonna start rounding off the workshop now. But in a moment, what I'll do is kind of display all my slides in grid view, so you can kind of just review what I went through during this presentation. And I thought it might be interesting to critique it. So think about what you've liked about my presentation today, what you didn't, and that's absolutely fine. What do you think of the structure, the design, the content I've included, the delivery, what you think could be improved? Feel free to share your thoughts in the chat because, I would be quite open to improving this for next time as well and understanding what you want to know about presentations and what your concerns are. So feel free to give me lots of constructive criticism. That is no problem at all. But yeah, so I'll show everything in grid view in a moment. But just some final tips for your presentation. So remember to take your time reviewing the assessment brief. Like I said, don't just come up with a bunch of ideas and stick them on your slides straight away. There needs to be some analysis and evaluation as well. Otherwise, such a presentation is likely to be quite superficial, and it may get you stuck at, say, a 2-2 or even lower, unless you're a very slick presenter and you're quite good at covering that up. Make sure the topic is interesting to you. Use appropriate resources to help you develop your understanding of the topic, and do invest time in your preparation and delivery. So as you can see, there were quite a few steps I took with presentation before even preparing slides or anything like that. And finally, thank you for joining me today on quite a cold day. Yeah, do put any questions in the chat. Do put your thoughts in the chat of the session. Like I say, do critique it. We've got a number of other sessions coming up. So the next 3 will be one on careers, one on academic integrity and plagiarism. That might be Sam's actually. Is that yours, Sam?
Yes, indeed. That's tomorrow. I'm doing the academic integrity one.
Yeah, Sam's been doing a load of work over the summer on academic integrity, so he is the expert on it. So it'll be a very worthwhile session to attend. And finally, how to use the library if you're a campus-based student. And then, yep, there is also something called the Arrivals Weekend, which is open to all students to welcome you to the university. So there's a link below that you can, that's quite a simple link. So le.ac.uk/study/welcome. But it'll be shared after this session as well, so you can access it. Yeah, so now I'm going to grid view. If you're happy with the session, I don't need to keep you any longer. Do feel free to get on with your day, and I hope you have a lovely week and settle into university well. But if you've got any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand, unmute yourself and ask them. And like I said, if you want to reflect on the presentation, do give me your feedback on it as well. Okay. I'll just take a moment to pause and have a drink while you absorb everything. There's been a lot of information.
Just to say, Tracy, it's not
Yep.
showing up as grid view on the shared screen at the moment.
Oh, no.
I don't know. It might be that if you go on share and then screen, you could do it in PowerPoint potentially and do grid view, but yeah, it doesn't seem to like doing it
Okay,
that way.
thanks for pointing that out.
Okay.
Okay, I'll open it up as a PowerPoint. Thank you for that. This might, so I am sharing my screen. Yep.
Yeah,
so I'll
that's
just
working.
scale it down a little bit so you can see everything.
Yeah, that works.
Is that okay? You can't see all the slides at once, but I feel it'd be way too small if I did that. So just a fun little reflection, which you can engage in if you want to, but there's no pressure. And any questions? So I can't see the chat now, Sam, so I'll be relying on you.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got an eye on the chat.
Yep. Oh, and also Emma, if there's anything you wanted to add that I didn't mention during the session, I know a few people have left, but you could do that now if you want.
Um, no, I think you've covered almost like anything I was thinking of, really. I think just if anyone's left, just to provide some comfort. And I know that presentations can be very scary, but honestly, the more you do, the more it'll just become bread and butter, and we'll be fine. And you'll look back and think, oh wow, I've done that, and I've presented in front of this group of people, and you feel really proud of yourself. And when I first came to uni, I didn't think, I really didn't like public speaking, and
Yeah,
now I just do it all the time. It just doesn't really faze me as much.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I would say that. I mean, university is very much about getting out of your comfort zone, and you just have to embrace it to some extent, don't you? And then, yeah, before you know it, you're a finalist, you're confident, you're good at presenting. How did that happen? Cool. Are there any questions in the chat?
Not at the moment, no.
Okay, I think I might have overwhelmed everyone. But maybe there'll be more questions in later sessions. Cool. So on that note, thank you very much for joining me, and thank you, Sam and Emma, for supporting the session. It's been really useful, especially when the slides weren't presenting properly.
No problem.
And
That's
yeah,
Thank you very much.